Hello, my name is Landon Mills, and today I'm going to be discussing musical modes from a historical, psychological, and philosophical perspective. The term mode, derived from the Latin modus, or standard of measure, refers to a musical scale or grouping of 7 notes. These modes can be utilized by a musician for composition, performance, or improvisation, and each scale has its own distinct personality and attributes. The concept of modes in music originated with ancient Greek mathematicians and composers, and is discussed in some detail in the writings of philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle. The concept had been all but forgotten by the fall of the Roman Empire, but was rediscovered during the mid to late Middle Ages. Unfortunately, during this rediscovery, there was a great deal of misinterpretation, but more on that later. Let's dive into the different modes as we understand them from a modern perspective so we have a basis for the rest of this discussion. In modern Western music theory, there are 7 modes: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. Each of these names is a derivation of the names of ancient Greek regions or subcultures. Let's begin with what we call Ionian mode. This is a familiar sound to us. It is also known as the major scale and is used most often in modern music. Here's how the scale sounds in context. Ionian mode is generally associated with happiness, resolution, sunshine, coming home, and an endless list of other descriptors. The second most common to our ears on this list is the Aeolian mode, also known as the minor scale. This scale is often associated with sadness, doom, or evil. In many ways, the Aeolian and Ionian are opposing forces, especially in modern music. Next, we have the Mixolydian mode. This one is still familiar to our ears, as it is nearly identical to a major scale. However, the Mixolydian mode has a lowered 7th scale degree. This causes many to associate the Mixolydian with jazz or with the blues. Here's how it sounds in context. Another mode which may be familiar to Westerners is the Dorian mode. This mode is almost identical to the Aeolian mode, but has a raised 6th scale degree. This creates a unique sound which feels historical and heroic to many. Here's how it sounds. The final 3 modes will start to deviate from the familiar sounds. Lydian mode has a dreamlike and floating quality. Phrygian mode has a dry, ancient sound which some associate with the desert or Eastern culture. And finally, the boogeyman, Locrian mode. This is the least commonly used mode and by far the most unsettling to Western ears. Now that we have a working theory for what the modes are, let's talk about how they work, or rather how they are all related. If we take a C major scale on the piano, or all white notes, well, we have Ionian mode. Now, to find all of the other modes on the piano, all we have to do is move the start of the scale up by one note at a time. So we started here. We move up one note to Dorian, up one note to Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and finally we're back to Ionian. If you haven't figured it out already, this suggests that all 7 of the modes can be created by reordering the same 7 notes. So what does all this mean? Well, a great deal to the prominent minds of ancient Greece. This was not simply a rich compositional system for musicians. The ancient Greeks experienced similar reactions to each distinct sound, and they saw this as a science of the mood. It was not just a philosophical theory, but rather a way to manipulate the psyche through the arts. By far, the most exciting aspect of this concept had to have been that all of it was scientifically feasible. Psychiatric control through the reordering of but 7 notes is a scientist's dream. So now that we have this deeply researched, well-established system with great potential and historical significance, let's flip it on its head and poke it full of holes. Remember when I alluded to some misinterpretation in the rediscovery of modes? Yeah, this is a big problem, and it comes down to an issue of tuning. As I said before, the names of modern or post-Middle Ages modes come from the names of Greek regions and subcultures. Believe it or not, there was not a one-world order of music theory in ancient times. It would follow that different regions would develop different cultural sounds based on the way that they tuned their instruments. So the way instruments were tuned in ancient Phrygia of the Iliad would lead us to the modern Phrygian mode, right? Wrong. Well, sort of. The Middle Age research, which resulted in modern modes, applied the wrong names to each scale. And as there were no battery-powered guitar tuners in early history, you can imagine that ancient Dorian would sound nothing like modern Dorian. This makes the task of interpreting the ancient philosophers' writings extremely difficult. But I'll take a whack. Without diving too deeply into ancient ethnomusicology, I can tell you that the Greeks built music on tetrachords. These are groupings of 4 notes by which a tuning system can be established. At the time, there were 3 concrete tetrachords, the Dorian, the Phrygian, and the Lydian, each named for its region of origin. These tuning systems give us 3 modes of the same names, except that in translation, the names for the Dorian and Phrygian modes were somehow swapped, and the Lydian actually refers to a major scale, or what we now call Ionian. What the ancient Greeks referred to as the mixed Lydian, probably where the translation term Mixolydian comes from, is actually what we hear as the Locrian mode. But Landon, you may ask, doesn't that leave us with only 4 modes? Exactly right, little Johnny, full marks. The Greeks discovered that the 3 tetrachords, when lowered by a 5th, would create corresponding hypomodes: Hypodorian, Hypophrygian, and Hypolydian. So in translation, Plato's Dorian is our Phrygian, and vice versa. Plato's Lydian is our Ionian, and mixed Lydian is our Locrian. Plato's Hypodorian, Hypophrygian, and Hypolydian are our Aeolian, Mixolydian, and Lydian respectively. And for whatever reason, every Western music institution has taught these errors without correction for hundreds of years. Now that I have you all sufficiently confused, let's look at an example. In Plato's Republic, several of these modes are discussed with clear intent on using them as a mood-altering or mood-defining tool. Mixolydian is defined as dirge-like, but if you recall the example I played, Mixolydian is the blues. It's almost a major scale. How can that be a dirge? Lydian is described as higher and more tense, but our Lydian is the floating, dreamlike sound, and it's lower than Mixolydian. Ionian is described as sloth-inducing and lax, but we know the major scale to be triumphant and happy. Now that I have demonstrated the confusion created by poor Middle Ages interpretation, let us translate with the better historical context we have. That should solve everything, right? The answer is sort of, but not really. Let's take another look. This is the sound Plato defines as dirge-like, mixed Lydian for him, Locrian for us. Okay, I could sort of see that. But here's what Plato says sounds lazy. And here's what Plato says sounds heroic. So did the ancient Greek philosophers just not know what they were talking about? Possible, but not likely. Which brings me to the point of this whole talk. What's more likely is that every aspect of the BC human, their psyche, their experiences, to a small degree even their DNA, was so different from ours that the modes meant something completely different to them. A sound which inspires our nature may very well have put them to sleep. A sound which makes us want to dance very easily could have underscored an ancient Greek funeral procession. This means that you could not understand the emotional effects a mode might have on a person without truly understanding a person, and then what would be the point? It is unfortunate that such an exciting theory of emotion and art and science would have so many holes in its practical use. But what's exciting is that through these musical tools, we can gain insight into the lives of ancient Greeks. We know what they did, and we know what they thought because these things were all recorded and thoroughly researched. But with proper translation of the modes, we can gain real insight into what they felt. I'm Landon Mills. Thank you for watching.